I'm a female, and I worked at Target for a while over a year ago. The Target that I worked at was very close to my apartment at the time, and it was a pretty enjoyable job for me. My favorite part was talking with co-workers and becoming friends with them. Mostly what I would do is work in the clothing department. I would do all sorts of things there, and it wasn't very stressful because things usually don't get busy like they do in the grocery section. At the time of the story, I had been working there for almost 4 months. I remember it very well. It all started on a typical day at work. I was in the clothing department, particularly the women's section, straightening up items that were out of place. It was during the daytime and the store was calm. This is when a tall man approached me. Assuming he was a customer who had a question about something, I greeted him, asking how I could help. The man stood there, looking directly at me with a somewhat creepy grin on his face for a moment. He then said, "Yes, you can help me by going out with me tonight." I laughed it off. I had no interest in going out with a man, but I wasn't scared of him or anything. I just told him that I had a boyfriend, even though I didn't actually have one. This was always the best way to tell off a guy that I wasn't interested in my experience. The man replied rather quickly, saying, "No, you don't." I told him that I did, and I asked the man if he needed help finding anything. He then responded with an even creepier reply, "Yes, directions to your house." I laughed off this remark as well. I was just hoping that the man was joking around because this was getting really weird. After he said that, I told him that I had a lot of work to do, and I told him to have a good day. Then, I started making my way to another section of the large clothing department that we had. The clothing area was practically big enough to get lost in. I was hoping to lose sight of the man, but when I started moving away, he followed. When I admitted to another section and he was still next to me, I stopped. I didn't have a problem with confrontation, and I said to the man, "Why are you following me? You're kind of creeping me out." The guy put his hands up as if to say my bad. He then walked away, and it was a huge relief. I had dealt with customers asking me out or trying to flirt with me a couple of times. It didn't happen very often, but here and there it did. None of them had been nearly as bad as this though. I kept working for several hours. By then, I had forgotten about my experience earlier, but I soon remembered when I spotted the same man. I couldn't believe it. At first, this was now about 3 hours after our first interaction. To me, it was still mind-blowing that he was still in the store. Maybe he had left and then come back. Either way, it was strange, and it was now a bigger concern for me because shortly after I had spotted him, I saw him look over at me and then look quickly away. And he was sort of far away too. It looked like he was almost hiding from me. He stood mostly covered by a rack of clothing, staring in my direction. I moved slightly and kept working, to which the man moved slightly as well to keep looking at me. I stopped inside. This was really annoying now. I walked away, leaving what I was doing. I moved to a whole nother section of the store, far away from that one. There, I didn't really have any work to do, but I just wanted to get that man off of me. I was now in the grocery area, and I was there for about a minute before spotting the man again. He was walking into the area, and he saw me for a split second, and then disappeared into a nearby aisle. At this point, I decided to take my break. I had one that I could take at any time, and I was planning to after I had finished the work that I was doing in the clothing department. But seeing as this creep was back and still following me around, I decided to just take my break now. I radioed in on my walkie-talkie to let my supervisor know I would be taking my break, then I headed towards the front end of the store. Our break room was through doors at the front, and I walked in there. When I got inside the break room, I thought back to the crazy situation. Did that man seriously think he was being slick? I mean, I spotted him twice, and it was like he thought I couldn't see him. I just hoped that he would notice I was not there anymore and then leave. I'm not going to lie, I took a little bit of extra time on my break. I was pretty concerned. To return back out and see the man again, if I did see him, I was going to have to tell a co-worker or our security team. I didn't want to have to do that, but I would if it was necessary. When I went back out though, I didn't notice the man anywhere. I went back to work in the clothing department, but I was much more alert and constantly looking around. I didn't see the guy for the rest of my shift that night, which was about 2 more hours. I was really happy about this, but still, I thought possibly he was still there, looking at me somewhere, and had just gotten better about hiding. At the end of the day, though, I don't think he was. I left work and went home, not seeing the guy at all. Soon, I forgot all about him. I worked several more times that week, mostly my usual shifts. One night the very next week, I found myself working on a quiet evening. I was almost done, and it was past the busy amount of customers that we would usually get between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. I was doing my usual work of organizing a section of the clothing department. That's when I got a call on my walkie. Somebody radioed asking for me, and I radioed back, telling them to go ahead. I wasn't quite sure who had said it, but that wasn't uncommon. A big store like Target has so many employees, plus there are always new people. A handful of my co-workers I could instantly recognize their voices over the walkie-talkie, but many of them I could not. After telling them to go ahead, they asked me to go to Channel 3. This is how we would communicate without other employees hearing us. It was used for more descriptive details or directions on what we were supposed to do. After turning to 3, I told them to go ahead again. That's when I was told that I was needed in receiving to help with something quick. I told them that I was on my way and began walking over. Receiving was the back room of the store. Basically, I wouldn't work back there a lot, but I had helped with things there several times in the past. It took me a few minutes to walk all the way back there, and when I had made it, I exited the store into the back. These were very quiet back there. I had expected to see someone there waiting for me. I turned my walkie to Channel 3 again and said that I was in receiving. Nobody said anything, but I heard my voice echo under somebody else's walkie nearby. I then called out, asking where they were, but I didn't get a response. I walked closer to the voice, which was near one of the doors leading to outside. First, it was open, and I could see outside into the night. That's when I saw the man again. He stepped out from behind a shelf back there. I couldn't believe he was here. "That was you on the walkie, wasn't it?" I said to him. The man just started walking towards me. I backed away as he got closer. I looked at how much taller he was than me. If he tried to grab me, it would be difficult to get away. He got closer, and I turned around, but as soon as I did, he grabbed my arm. Then he started to pull me backwards. I started yelling, but back there, it wasn't likely anybody would hear me. Suddenly, I heard the doors leading back to the shopping area open. I then saw one of my co-workers, Emmy, walking over. I yelled at her, and she asked what was going on. The man let me go, and then sprinted out the doors outside. I ran over to Amy and explained to her what had happened. Amy told me that she had heard the person asking me to go to Channel 3. She said that when she didn't recognize the voice and was just being nosy in general, she turned to Channel 3 as well. She was wondering what I was being asked to do when she heard I was supposed to go to receiving. She found it strange because she had just been there earlier in the night and wasn't aware of anything that would be done back there. She decided to see for herself, and I'm really glad that she did. We had to call the police and report the incident, but unfortunately, not much could be done. The man had bought a walkie-talkie and got on the same frequency as us, which was not hard to do at all. Many standard walkie-talkies were capable of it. I'm just glad I was all right. I've worked at Target for a few months after that, and luckily never saw the man again. One night I went shopping after work. I was getting a lot of items, mainly groceries. I got a cart and began shopping around the store. It wasn't all that busy, and that made things go smoothly. After shopping for probably about 30 minutes, I was almost done. My cart had lots of items in it, and I was in the last area of the store that I would be going to, which was the cold section. The refrigerated items and the freezer items are what I would always get last. That way they wouldn't melt by the time I got home. When I got to that section of the store, it was empty. I was the only person there. They had a freezer at the back of the store, and I was getting something from it when I saw something strange. It was like movement of some sort behind the items. This particular freezer section was up against the very back of the store, leading to the back room. That's when I realized that a person was back there behind the freezer shelves, between the levels of shelves that they had, but not by much. Somebody was right behind the spot that I was at. At first, I thought it was kind of funny, but I soon realized it wasn't a Target employee. I moved down to get something else, and whoever was there seemed to move down with me. As I was examining a product, I could see that the person was wearing black, not the typical red shirt and khakis that a Target employee would wear. Then they got closer, and I noticed that I could now see their head through the gap between the shelves. The person was wearing a black ski mask. My only thought was that this was really strange. I moved even further down, and the masked man moved down with me. He was beginning to really freak me out. He kept staring at me from the other side. Luckily for me, I only needed one more item from that aisle. I went to grab it as the masked man stared at me. Then, as I was reaching for the product, the guy reached over and shoved the whole box of them at me. Multiple items fell onto the floor. I put them back as he disappeared into the freezer. This guy was causing problems, and I decided to tell an employee about him. I walked down a few aisles before finding somebody who worked there. I told them about the guy and how he was inside of the freezer. The employee told me that she would tell a person to leave, and that they couldn't be back there. There happened to be doors leading to the back room of the store right nearby, and I watched her walk through them. About a minute later, the employee emerged again. She told me that she couldn't find anybody back there at all. Whoever had been doing that must have left. I hadn't seen anybody else come out of the doors though. I shrugged it off and was done with my shopping, so I decided to head out. I walked up to the front and paid for everything, then left the store. About a week later, I returned. I would say that I went grocery shopping roughly once a week. I didn't have a specific day or anything like that I would go, but on average, it was probably about once. This time that I went back to the Target was just like any other. I did all my shopping in about 30 minutes or so, and then checked out with all my items. After I left the store, I walked out to my car and unloaded the groceries into it. Then, I started driving home. This particular Target has several other businesses around it, like just past the parking lot. There were also a few trees and bushes around for scenery. As I was driving away, leaving the parking lot, I was driving between some other businesses and the Target parking lot, going to a connecting road. That's when I saw the same guy dressed in all black and a ski mask. He was halfway hiding behind a bush, and he popped out and looked directly at me as I drove away. I drove right past him in disbelief. This was the same guy who I had seen last time I had been at the same Target, but this time he was outside, not inside the store. It was crazy to me how I specifically saw him. Maybe he just liked to go to Target and mess with people. I really didn't know. But what I did know is that I was really weirded out by this. The way he was hiding in the bushes was concerning. Luckily, I was away from him now and on the way home. After that experience, I didn't go to Target for almost 2 weeks. When I returned, it was just another routine shopping trip, just like any other. I did my shopping like always and then left the store. It was nighttime again, and things were pretty quiet inside and outside of the Target. I had parked sort of in the middle of the parking lot, about halfway back. There were a few other cars around mine. I got back to my car, unloaded the groceries again, and got inside. I started my engine and was just about ready to drive away. I happened to glance over at the car that was parked directly next to me, to the left, for no particular reason. And I glanced over, that I noticed movement. It caught my attention, and my eyes stayed focused on it. The entire car had looked empty to me. The car was a standard-looking white sedan, and the back windows were tinted dark, but the front windows I could see through. That's when somebody emerged from the back seat, crawling over into the front passenger seat. It was a guy wearing all black and a ski mask. My jaw dropped when I saw this. He looked right at me through the window separating us. He continued to stare at me for probably 5 seconds or so as I sat there in total shock. Then his door started to open. I was so surprised still from just seeing the guy that I didn't do anything. It was like I couldn't move. After he opened the door, he stood up and reached for my driver's door. I finally came to my senses and hit the lock switch just moments later. The man with the mask tried opening my driver's door, which had just locked. He then leaned in very closely to my driver's window, basically pressing his face against it. I was beyond creeped out. He stared right at me as close as he possibly could. I yelled at him to go away, but he didn't move. I put my car into reverse and then started backing out. The guy grabbed onto my car as I backed away. He was trying to stay with me. And when I had backed out and began driving, he finally let go. I saw him then run back to the car that he had been inside. I hit the gas harder to leave as soon as possible. Then I was able to make it out of the parking lot, and I quickly turned onto a busier street. After that, I quickly turned into another parking lot and then turned my lights off and parked. I watched, and several seconds later, I saw a car come out of the Target parking lot and drive quickly down the street past me. I was pretty sure that that was the guy. After the car was long gone, I was able to drive home, and I made it back okay. This wasn't all that long ago, each of the last 3 times. I went to that Target. I've seen the same man. Why is he there, and what is he doing? I really don't know. I haven't been back to that Target since. I'm a former Target employee, and I worked there 5 years ago, pushing carts in the parking lot. This was one of my favorite jobs that I've had so far, to be honest. It was pretty enjoyable and easy work. However, I do have one really scary story to tell, something that still creeps me out when I think about it. I worked at a super Target, and it was in a busy area. The store and the parking lot were very big and close to other stores and restaurants nearby, which made work challenging occasionally because of how busy it would get. One time, I was working a night shift, and it had been really busy during the day. However, by now, things were very calm. It felt like the calm after the storm because the carts were scattered throughout the parking lot, not just in the corrals. This was typical on busy days. It was probably about 9 p.m. or so when I went to the northeast corner of the parking lot. There was a car against the curb at the corner, the farthest away from the store. As I was grabbing a cart, I noticed an SUV pulling into this area of the parking lot. There was an entrance and exit right there as well. The SUV did not keep driving though. Instead, it stopped right in front of me. I found this kind of strange, but I just got the cart and started walking back to the store. That's when I heard a voice call out, "Hey." I looked back and saw a man getting out of the SUV. The vehicle was not parked in a parking space, but just parked there, partly covering 2 different spaces and the driving area. The guy said to me that maybe I could help him with something. I stopped with the cart and looked back at him. I asked him what he needed help with. The man waved me over, and I started walking to him. He said that he didn't know if I knew much about cars or not, but he didn't, and something weird was happening with his. The man was short, but looked sort of strong. I did know a little bit about cars, but not a whole lot. I was hoping that I would be able to help the man with this problem though. Then the man asked me to get inside the back seat of his car and listen to the weird noise it made when he drove. The question really seemed to come out of left field. It took me by surprise, and it also seemed really sketchy. "I actually don't know anything about cars," I said suddenly. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." Then I turned around to get my cart and started walking back over to it. The man told me to wait, but I didn't. I kept walking, making my way back to the Target. I heard footsteps of the man coming after me though. This was really strange. I sped up, and the guy behind me seemed to speed up as well. At that point, I decided to just start sprinting. I felt like I was in danger, and I knew if I made it into Target, I would be safe. I ran all the way there, sprinting with the cart, and the man could not keep up and stopped chasing me. When I got back inside, I decided to work on the other end of the parking lot for a while, and that's exactly what I did. I also tried to stay close to the building as I collected carts from the other end. Everything went fine. I looked out to the other side of the parking lot where the man in his car had been, and I didn't see him or the SUV. He must have left, which was good. After working for a while, it was time for my final break of the day. It was a 15-minute break. I walked back inside and into the break room. There, I sat on my phone, scrolling through social media and Snapchatting with friends. At that time, I was the only person in the break room. With it being late, there was an overlap of people at the end of their evening shifts or at the beginning of their overnight shifts. Nobody else was taking their break, but this was fine with me. About halfway through, I heard the door to the break room open and close. There was a little hallway with a closet that led into the break room. I expected somebody to enter the room, but no one did. I didn't think anything of it. I continued sitting in my chair and looking at my phone. But several moments later, I had a strange feeling. It was like the feeling that I was being watched. I usually don't get this feeling, so when I did, I turned around. That's when I saw the guy who had chased after me earlier. He was standing in the entrance of the break room, looking right at me. Then he started walking closer to me. I got up and once again sprinted away from the man. I ran out the other exit of the break room, which led to an employees-only area where you punched in. And there was a desk there as well. Nobody was back there at the time. There was also a door leading outside, and I ran out of it and back into the parking lot. I ran around to the other entrance door and quickly found one of the managers. I told them the whole story, but when they went into the break room, the man was gone. He must have exited after I had. Luckily, I didn't have much time left on the clock. I worked very carefully for the next 30 minutes or so, then I punched out and went home. I never saw the man again. After this incident, I worked at Target for quite a while, and nothing like that ever happened again, which I'm glad to say. Back in high school my junior year, I used to get to school about 15 minutes before it started. That's what time the bus would drop us off. After getting inside, I would head upstairs to my locker first. Then there was this spot upstairs near the stairs that had a large window at the end of the hall. It wasn't that far from my locker either, and you could sit on the ledge in front of the window. My friends and I would sit around there just about every day and talk. It was kind of a routine or a before-school hangout spot for us. It overlooked part of the parking lot and also the softball field next to the school to the east. We could also see the sun rising, and it lit up the inside really well. One day, I arrived at school, went upstairs to my locker, and then over to my friends by the window. There were about 5 of us or so there, and we chatted until the warning bell sounded. When it did, we all started to disperse to our classes. The hallways had been really crowded, but things were quickly becoming more quiet. I looked out the window and saw a few kids hurrying in at the last minute to make it to class. Then, I saw this one guy hurry into the school. He was too old to be a student, and I didn't recognize him as a teacher. I thought maybe he was a substitute at first, but he was not dressed for the part. He just wore an old, baggy-looking sweatshirt and sweatpants. He entered the school on the floor below, and then I headed to my class. I walked through the hallways down towards the other end. My classroom really wasn't that far away, and it was also on the 2nd floor. As I got there, I noticed down at the end of the hallway, the same guy who I had seen entering the school was now coming up to the top of the stairs. I went into my classroom at that point. Class went on as usual, as did my next few classes after that. Then came lunch period. I remember that as I was sitting with a couple of my friends at a table, I saw the guy again. He walked briefly into the lunchroom and then out another way. I was surprised to see him again, and I also thought that it was weird that I even noticed. The school that I went to was pretty large, with a lot of students, and it would be easy to blend in with a crowd. Later in the day, in my last hour, we were in class, and about halfway through, the phone in the classroom rang. Our teacher picked it up at the desk. Afterwards, he told us that the school was being locked down. We'd had to get up and move to the back end of the classroom. Then he locked the doors and turned out the lights to the classroom. We were all really confused. I didn't even think about the guy that I kept seeing around the school earlier. I was as clueless as everybody else. All of us in the class were talking to each other, wondering what was going on. Nobody knew though. The teacher wouldn't tell us either. He just said for us to keep calm and to be quiet. About an hour went by, and finally, the lockdown was lifted. We still didn't know what was going on. School was let out, and we all went home. I rode the bus, and when I got home, my mom was there and asked me about the lockdown. I guess she had heard more about it than I did. I found out that a man, the same one who I had seen multiple times in the school, was the cause of it. During the last class period of the day, he was seen suspiciously walking down a hallway. The school was then locked down. Police were called, but unfortunately, the man was able to escape through an open window. Nobody knew who he was. I told my mom that I had seen the guy enter the school and had seen him again later multiple times. It blew my mind that the guy was able to fly under the radar for so long. He had been there since the start of the school day, but it wasn't until the last hour that anybody seemingly noticed him. I'm just glad that the guy didn't cause any harm. I don't know who he was or what he was doing. This story takes place years ago when I was in high school. It happened after the lunch period. The way my school worked is that we would have class, then lunch, then study hall. Class was an hour long, and lunch and study hall were about 25 minutes each. Your study hall classroom would be the same classroom that you had directly before lunch. But for me, I had gym class that period. It was 10th grade PE. The class was very easy and enjoyable for me. When we would have study hall though, we would have to use a different teacher's classroom who had prep hour at that time. But a couple of times we were unable to get the classroom and then had to spend study hall in the gym, which was kind of weird. If that happened, we would sit in the bleachers or on the gym floor and do homework. Usually the teacher would let us know before we went to lunch where it would be, and most of the time we had a certain classroom. So on this school day after lunch, I started heading back to the classroom. It was a decent ways away from the lunchroom on the other side of the school. I talked with some of my friends that I sat with at lunch for a while. My gym teacher was not very strict at all, especially with study hall. He didn't mind students coming back a minute or two late. The lunchroom cleared out, and I began walking back to class. The bell rang when I was still like a minute away. By then, the hallways were empty besides me walking them. Soon, I got to the classroom. The door was closed, which was odd, and when I tried opening it, I couldn't. The door was locked. I also noticed that inside the window, the lights appeared to be off. I turned and walked away, realizing that we must be meeting in the gym today. I hadn't known though. I remember thinking to myself, I don't remember being told that we were meeting in the gym. How did everybody else know besides me? I headed back towards the gym, and then I heard an announcement come over the school speakers. It said, "This is a lockdown, and this is not a drill. Please remain in your classrooms, and no students are to be out in the halls." I was about halfway back to the gym at that point. It still hadn't registered to me that the classroom had been locked down. I hurried up and made my way to the gym. When I got there, the doors were closed and locked. It was in that moment that I realized they were meeting in the classroom. I know I was a little slow on that, but I headed back to the classroom, now walking as fast as I could without running. I hadn't heard or seen anybody else in the hallways at all. It was completely quiet until suddenly, I heard the sound of something hitting a locker around the corner. It was like somebody punched a locker or threw something up against it. The sound was very loud, especially to break the dead silence. I stopped in my tracks and no longer wanted to keep going to my classroom. I started walking in the other direction. In that moment, I heard footsteps coming from where I had heard the loud noise. My heart started racing. I kept walking and heard the footsteps continue. They were about to come around the corner now. I saw a staircase on the left and darted over and quickly went down the stairs. After getting down, I ran about 30 feet down the hallway to the first classroom that I saw. When I was there, I desperately started banging on the door. I didn't know what class this was, but I was hoping that they would let me in. After knocking a couple of times, I tried the door, but of course it was locked. The teacher was not answering. I hoped that there was actually a class going on in there currently. As I waited, I heard whoever had been behind me now walking down the stairs rather quickly. I looked back and saw their legs appearing, but couldn't tell who it was yet. I didn't want to know. I turned back and kept banging on the door. Then I heard the person behind me reach the bottom of the stairs and start walking towards me. All of a sudden, the classroom door finally opened. The teacher let me in and quickly shut the door once I was in the classroom. All of the lights were off, but I saw the students in the class were in the back of the room and on the floor. The teacher quickly locked the door, and then somebody actually tried opening it just a few seconds later. It must have been whoever had been following me. Then, they banged on the door a couple of times. The teacher looked out the little window and then turned back and walked away. Some students started talking quietly. One of them asked me where I had come from. The teacher stopped everyone and said for us to all be quiet. I remember things got really silent for a while. Then, she went back over to the door and looked out again. I think by then, the guy was gone. We remained locked down though for what felt like a really long time. I think it was almost an hour. Finally, the lockdown was lifted. I remember that I got called to the principal's office and had to answer some questions about what happened. They didn't really tell me much about the situation though. That was definitely the scariest moment of my time in high school. I don't know what would have happened if that person caught up with me. I don't want to know either. Back when I was in high school during my freshman and sophomore years, I would ride the bus. It picked me up at the corner of my street early in the morning and would drop me off afterwards. I went to an average-sized high school about 10 minutes away from where I lived. At least, the place seemed average to me. There were probably about 700 or 800 kids combined in all 4 grades. This is something that happened during my sophomore year. It was a school day just like any other to that point. One class had just ended, and I was going to my final class for the day. As I stood in the hallway near my locker, I talked with some of my friends. I had a decent friend group of several other guys. The locker comments were always really crowded in between classes, and I remember that the first warning bell rang. That meant that you had 2 minutes to make it to class. Kids started leaving the comments, but me and a couple of friends stayed. My classroom wasn't really that far off. I remember that one of the guys there was a grade ahead of us, and his name was Jake. His brother was Tommy, and Tommy was in my friend group, so I think that's why he was there. As I was about to head to class, I heard another sound come over the school speakers. At first, I was thinking, how could the bell ring again so soon? But it wasn't really the same bell sound for when class starts. It was followed by an announcement over to the intercom. We were told that the school was going into a lockdown. All of us should go to our next hour classes immediately, and the teachers should lock the doors and turn off the lights. There was still kind of a lot of kids around, including the 4 of my friends. I heard one of them say they were going to just leave. Nobody wanted to sit in the classroom for who knows how long during a lockdown. One of the school exit doors was not that far away. There were already some kids leaving. I saw about 10 kids running for the doors and going outside, and more followed. There was only 1 class period left for the day, so I decided that I wanted to leave as well. But I didn't drive there. That's when Jake asked me if I wanted to leave. He said that he would give a ride home to anybody that wanted to because he was leaving. As he said this, he started to walk away. Half of my friend group was leaving, and the other half were actually going to their classes. Other kids were also leaving, and it became chaos. We had to leave fast if we were going to. I saw one of the teachers enter the hallway and start to tell kids to get to their classes. There were fewer and fewer kids around by the second. I decided to leave, but by that point, Jake and my other friends had already left. I remember the teacher yelling at the kids to stop leaving. There were probably like 50 that ended up making it out of the school. I was one of them, and when I got outside, my friends and I did not do a good job sticking together. Kids were literally running away to leave. They were going to the parking lots where students parked mostly, and some ran off through the grass towards a nearby neighborhood. The school was in an area that was mostly residential, but there were a few businesses down the road. There was a woods and all of the sports fields behind the school. The student parking lots were on the side, and then one was behind the tennis courts. When I got outside, I couldn't even see Jake or my friends anymore. It was basically chaos. Kids were running everywhere. A teacher took a step out of the school and told us all to come back inside, but nobody listened to him. I figured that Jake and my friends would be in the parking lot, so I ran in that direction. I had to kind of go around the school to get there though. I wasn't sure which parking lot Jake parked in, so I went to the main one first. When I got there, he was nowhere in sight. I realized that it must be the other one, and I hoped that I wasn't too late. By now, most kids had made it to their cars if they were leaving. I sprinted for the other parking lot, but it was a ways away. When I got there, there was nobody. A lot of cars were still there, but I didn't see any students at all. I walked around hoping that maybe my friends were in their car but hadn't left yet. Unfortunately, though, I didn't see them. I realized that they must have left without me. Now, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back to the school because it was probably locked, and I wasn't supposed to leave in the first place. But I also couldn't go home because it was too far to walk, and I didn't have a car. I started walking back up closer to the school, not really knowing exactly what I was going to do. I got to a back door of the school and tried going inside, but it was locked, just like I figured it would be. After this, I was going to go back around to the parking lot and then walk down the sidewalk. But when I turned, I saw some guy coming out of the school. I just knew that this guy had to be the reason for the lockdown. He was looking over his shoulder, was way too old to be a student, and definitely not a teacher. I was a long way away from him, and I quickly ran behind a tree that was nearby. I was just hoping that the guy didn't see me. For a few seconds, I didn't bother to look and see where the guy was. I was expecting him to walk in another direction, but as I was still behind the tree, I heard the guy walking closer. I ran from behind the tree to the woods, which was maybe 20 feet away. There was no question that the guy saw me running into the woods. I was hoping that he wouldn't follow me. I got inside, went about 20 feet deep in it, and then ducked down and hid. I had no clue why the school had been locked down up until that point. I had been more concerned about leaving with my friends. After seeing a suspicious guy leave the school, though, I realized that I might be in actual danger. For a few seconds, I didn't hear anything until I heard footsteps in the grass right outside of the woods that I was in. I couldn't take it any longer, and I got up and started running. I ran through the woods and then to the left. I didn't hear the guy enter the woods or anything, but I just wanted to get out of there. After like 2 or 3 minutes of running, I reached the edge of the woods, kind of near the street. I walked through the grass to the sidewalk and then ran down it. I kept going until I eventually reached a gas station. When I got there, I asked the employee working if I could borrow his cell phone to call my mom. I told him how my school had been locked down and everything. He let me, and I was able to wait there until my mom came and picked me up. Luckily, she worked not too far away from the school and our house. I was able to leave work without a problem. I didn't get in trouble for leaving school early either. The lockdown ended up lasting for the entire class period. In fact, students were kept there almost 10 minutes after the regularly scheduled time that school got out. So, I didn't miss any class or anything. The man that I saw had entered the school trying to pick up his daughter. It was a situation where he was divorced and hadn't seen his daughter in a long time and didn't have custody of her. He was also drunk and threatened a custodian when asked to leave. I'm not sure why he came over to me when I was in the woods, though. It was a really scary situation for me. A few years back, after some friends and I graduated high school, we celebrated in the White Mountains National Forest Preserve. We only lived 2 or so hours away, so it wasn't much of a hike. We all packed inside my friend Alexis's car. Also with us was my friend Rob, his girlfriend Stephanie, and our friend Kelly. Alexis's car was a Hyundai Accent, so a very small vehicle. We didn't pack much. We were headed to this Airbnb in Carroll, New Hampshire. At the height of the summer, it was a gorgeous drive. Once we got to the house, it was just as depicted in the photos, only the pictures didn't include the shambling-looking shed next to the house. It seemed like it had seen better years. I probably could have knocked it down myself. Alexis joked around that maybe some old crazy guy lived in there, and that's why the place was so cheap, but we all laughed it off and unpacked our things. I'll be honest, I was really into Alexis, and I think she was into me, on account that she said we should share a bed, more so because the third bedroom had 2 doors leading to the outside and had a perfect view of that old shed, so she didn't want to sleep there, and she wouldn't let me. We both put our things in the living room and made the pull-out couch our bed. Not much happened the first night. A little later, we all sat in the hot tub in the garage room. Alexis sat next to me, and we faced the woods, while Rob and his girlfriend were opposite of us. Rob's girlfriend couldn't step completely into the water on account of the stitches she just got. Stephanie and I were always good friends and carried on with stories and joked about high school, sipping on our potentially illegally acquired booze. Kelly, on the other hand, was changing and not with us. Rob kicked my leg from under the water and winked, seeing how close Alexis was getting to me, but that wasn't too much of a deal. We tried to plan out our next day and talked about hiking to Mount Washington and the Flume Gorge. After a good soak, I eased into bed with Alexis, and we watched Rick and Morty for a while until the clock struck 2 a.m., and we sat outside. The stargazing here was supposed to be amazing, and a bit later, Kelly tagged along with us. What happened next was hard to explain. In front of the house was this huge deck that we were sitting on. It was pitch black, and no cars were around. More or less, we were in the middle of nowhere. No one really understands true silence until you're away from cars or planes for that matter. The sky was brightly lit purple-blue, full of stars. Kelly hushed me one time, just a few feet away from the porch. She heard some crunching as if something was approaching the deck. There was definitely something walking out there. I waved it off as a raccoon or fox until the steps sounded heavy and I looked at Alexis. The fear began to set in as I noticed her gaze was looking towards the old shed where the footsteps had begun. Quickly, I ushered the girls into the cabin and locked all the doors. I tried to explain to them that it's still possibly an animal, especially if animals had taken over that old shed easily. Both of them calmed down. Kelly walked back into her room and I again lay down beside Alexis. The next morning, I woke up to Rob and his girlfriend cooking breakfast in the kitchen, which was just across the room from Alexis and me. We had a big day planned out and we did quite a lot of hiking, with most of us forgetting what had transpired last night, other than Alexis. When we came back from hiking, Alexis suggested exploring the old shed that was beside the house now that it was daylight. Nothing that bad could happen, right? And I'll be honest, I didn't want to, but I didn't want Alexis to think I was a wuss. We opened the screen door, investigating the first room. There was an old rickety rocking chair. It seemed it might break if I tried to sit in it. The next door had one of those brass doorknobs, but it was rusted and dented. I looked at Alexis before grabbing the door, and she groaned as she opened the door. There wasn't much to the room. The floor was dirt. There were dirt-caked windows and some trash on the floor. Alexis made a point that it smelt of cigarette smoke. It may have been the designated smoking spot in the Airbnb. We both shrugged it off and joined the others out back. Rob was starting a fire. Some typical conversation was going on. Rob poked fun at Alexis and me. The sun set, and I turned off the floodlight out back to make the ambience of our fire nicer. Some chuckles and stories were passed around, Rob and I boasting about our feats and whatnot. Then there grew a silence. That same crunching from last night is heard behind us, just against the tree line, except it was faster and headed in our direction. And just like that, there was a flash of green light, lighting up the entirety of the backyard for just a moment. Whatever was running towards us halted, but my thoughts were ruptured by Stephanie's screams as she bolted towards the house. Behind us, a blood-curdling cry or yelp was heard, a deafening sound that at first we thought was a siren. I instantly stood up, yelling for everyone to get inside. Stephanie must have seen whatever it was that made that cry. In my bolt, I accidentally knocked over Kelly, who hadn't gathered the entire scene yet. I turned around to help her up. Rob was already halfway to the house. I ran to help Alexis gather our food items. Last thing we wanted if it was a bear, for them to stay any longer. After that, I rushed Alexis to the back door where Rob was waiting for us with some kind of bear spray. I already at this point had my boy knife out. I commanded him to go in, but he yelled at me to go in because he's got the range. The two of us saw this black mess walking along the outskirts of our fire. We didn't stay long enough to find out what it was. After meeting the girls in the living room, we called the police immediately. The officer reported to the house and looked all around with his flashlight, finding nothing. He clarified to us that the flash was due to lightning striking a nearby power line or transformer. As for the thing, he said it was likely a Fisher cat or something, but Stephanie said that she saw a man hunched over with a cloak or blanket hung over him. Least to say, we didn't stay the next night over the sheer paranoia of someone or something stalking us in the woods. Was reason enough. To say the least, we haven't returned to the mountains since. Who knows what's crawling around in those woods? I'm 26 years old, still living with my parents. I'm not content with my job, and I'm in a relationship that I'm not too sure about. To say I've been stressed would be a monumental understatement. My mom and I were not getting along 1 week, and everyone was just bothering me. I wanted to escape for a weekend. I looked into little one-bedroom Airbnbs up in the mountains and found one for cheap. It was in Troutdale, Virginia, a couple of hours away from us, and based on the pictures, it was this nice, private, and peaceful-looking little place surrounded by woods. It was fall too, so the foliage was going to be beautiful. I told my parents I was going there for the weekend. My mom seemed overly happy about me leaving for the weekend. My girlfriend was more so just confused, finding it weird and suspicious that I was going away to some random cabin in the woods alone for a weekend. When Friday came, I packed a backpack full of clothes, toiletries, and my laptop, and I headed out for the road. It was around a 2.5-hour drive door to door. The area of Troutville was very quiet and scenic. It was a perfect escape from suburbia back home. I needed a nice weekend just to spend to myself. I was driving up a gravel road when my GPS told me I arrived. I saw an opening in the trees next to the road. The instructions the owner of the Airbnb gave me were to cut through this opening onto the grass and up the little hill. I did exactly this, and there I saw the cute little house sitting at the top of the hill. The second I stepped out of the car, I inhaled the fresh rural air, instantly feeling happy I did this. The owner told me where to find the key to the front door. I let myself in and checked the place out. It was a nice cozy living room, small kitchen, bathroom, and one loft bedroom that you had to climb a ladder-like stairway to get up into. There was a circular window over the bed. Lots of light got into the house, which was nice. I went out to walk some of the trails the owner told me about a 5-minute drive away. On the drive back to the house afterwards, I noticed these two guys walking down the gravel road. As my car was passing, they literally stopped in their tracks to turn and look at me as I passed. I waved and smiled, thinking they were friendly locals, but they didn't wave back. It was completely off-putting. They looked at me as if my driving down the road was a crime. I didn't look back. I turned into the entrance of the property and back up the hill. I started reading one of the books I brought with me in the living room with the fireplace going. It was incredibly cozy. The sun was on its way down, and after reading a chapter of my book, I realized I was getting hungry. I went outside to my car, about to drive to the nearest Walmart, when I noticed two men kind of running into the woods down the hill by the entrance of the property, probably in response to seeing me come outside. I wondered if it was those two guys from the road earlier. It was incredibly strange. I suddenly decided to take my laptop and backpack with me in the car while I was gone, just to be safe. On the drive into town, I messaged the owner letting him know about this. He replied, saying it's nothing to be alarmed about. There's a lot of teens in the area that walk around. So, I dismissed it. I drove like 20 minutes to the closest Walmart, since there were literally no grocery stores in the area. I picked up a few food items to hold me over. Some milk, granola bars, fruit, frozen dinners, bread, and cold cuts. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was completely pitch black out. There were no street lights on these gravelly roads, and with no neighboring houses, truly the only light was from my headlights. It was creepy for sure. I pulled up to the hill to the little house. It was almost hard to find in the dark. I grabbed my backpack and the grocery bag and went up to the house in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to see. Once inside, I locked the door immediately. It was creepy out there. I ate real quick and went back to reading my book by the fire. Pretty soon, the lights to the room suddenly cut out, and the only light in the entire house was from the fireplace. I tried flicking on anything electric, but the power was gone. I went to message the owner again, who swiftly replied back to check the main breaker in the circuit box outside by the telephone pole near the back of the house. I didn't reply. There was no way in hell I was going out there. I was already paranoid from earlier, and why would the power be randomly cut out anyway? Something was off. I heard a creak in the floorboard from the darkest corner of the room by the bathroom door. I looked over, saw this tall, looming figure in the doorway of the bathroom, lit up only by the fireplace. My worst fear had been realized. This was actually happening. A soft yet deep and disturbing voice told me to remain calm and give him everything I had. I was so scared I could barely speak. I said all I had was my laptop and some clothes. He told me to empty my wallet of all my money, which I did as he stood in the doorway. I still couldn't see his face. He told me to go into the kitchen and stay there. Moments later, I heard the door to the house close. I looked into the living room. My laptop, backpack, and money were all gone. I called 911 quietly to report a robbery. 20 minutes later, an officer arrived. I described the two guys I'd seen walking down the street earlier that day, assuming it was them working together on this. Basically, all the officer could tell me was that they'd be on the lookout for anyone matching those descriptions. I messaged the owner to tell him what happened, and he was sympathetic at first, or so it seemed. He said I could go home the next day, but he didn't want to refund me for my horrible experience. A trip I thought would be a nice detox for a stressful point in my life only made it worse. Luckily, my laptop was only like $400. I didn't pack any expensive clothing, but it was still the scariest experience of my life. There is a small part of me that believes the Airbnb host may have something to do with it because I still have no idea how that guy got into the house. I rent out my South Carolina house on Airbnb whenever I'm not using it. It's a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house by the beach. 2 of the bedrooms are guest rooms, which are accessible to the people renting it. The master bedroom I keep locked with my clothes and certain belongings in there. That room is for me, and I have to keep my stuff somewhere instead of lugging it back and forth every time I go down there. I have a regular lock and then a deadbolt to lock on there, so no one's ever getting in there unless they chop the door down or break through the window. But also, it's not like I keep anything super expensive in there, mainly just clothing. This was early last spring. It was still chilly up in Massachusetts where I live most of the year. I wanted to take a drive down to my South Carolina house for the week. For the most part, I work remotely, so luckily I'm able to do this when I want to. Ordinarily, I'd have my usual cleaning lady come and clean the house after each guest leaves. The cost of her service is baked into the price of the rental on Airbnb, but since I was going down right after the current renter would leave, I just pocketed the cleaning lady money and planned on going down to clean it myself. The last renter was a guy named Raymond. Through our messages, he told me he was renting with his fiancée and asked for good restaurants to eat at in the area. He seemed trustworthy. I always prefer to rent to couples or smaller groups of women as opposed to groups of young men, because they're usually the ones to come and get shit-faced and potentially damage the place. I started my drive very early in the morning. It was about a 16-hour drive, stopping only for a quick bite and to use the bathroom. By the time I got to the house, it was about 10 o'clock at night. I went to unlock and open the front door first before going back to my car to grab my bags and go inside. I was shot from driving. I didn't even bother checking the place out or anything for a mess. I just went straight to my bedroom door to unlock it. I collapsed into the bed without brushing my teeth or anything. For those that haven't done it, a 16-hour straight drive will absolutely kill you. I crawled under the covers and I was out like a baby in a matter of minutes. You'd think I'd have slept through the night, but no. I woke up in a black room. The clock next to my bed read 11:30 p.m. I had only been asleep for a little more than an hour. Something woke me up. I grabbed my phone to check for any texts out of habit, then I turned on the bedside lamp. I looked around the room, then got up and went out to the living room. I took this moment to start analyzing the place. I didn't notice a single thing moved, not a pillow, not a can of beer, nothing. I went to the bedrooms. Both were void of any people, though the covers on a bed in one of the rooms seemed to have been moved, so yes, they did come. I thought they may have been the cleanest couple to have ever stayed in my place. I have a camera set up on the front porch of the house. I never really think to check it unless a customer is giving me any kind of hard time, but I was curious. I opened the app to the camera system on my phone and went to the movement history. It picked up on a man entering the house via the code lock 3 days earlier. Just a man though, he had no woman with him. Strange. I checked for any other movement updates from then until the moment I showed up, which it also caught on video, and there was nothing. I checked it over like 5 times. I suddenly got the chills. I went to the Airbnb app to message Raymond and asked if he checked out okay, even though it was late at night. I went to check the bedroom where I presumed he slept in. I started checking under the bed and in the closets. I was yanking the closet doors open as if I were ripping off a band-aid each time. I was greeted with an empty closet. I moved along to the second guest bedroom. Both twin beds in here were still neat and untouched. As I yanked open the last closet he could have been in, I saw that it was empty. I sat on one of the beds for a second to just stare at the conversation between Raymond and I. That's when I heard the master bedroom door click shut quietly, in a way that a person would have done it, not a drift. I went out to the living room and looked at the master bedroom door. I said, "Raymond, are you still in here?" With a shake in my voice. No response. I could see the light was still on in the room through the bottom crack of the door. I got on all fours to look under the crack of the door, and I fell backwards when I saw 2 feet standing not far behind the door, maybe a couple feet away. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen, planning to grab the biggest carving knife, and it was already taken. By this point, my only logical option was to leave the house and call 911, and that's what I did. I waited out front until the police showed up. Then, as we went inside, there was Raymond waiting in the living room, no knife in hand. He spoke in this Portuguese accent, acting all innocent, saying he just needed a place to stay for one more night, which was complete. He denied ever picking up the knife, which was conveniently placed back in the knife holder. Now, after 30 minutes of 2 police officers outside talking to Raymond and 2 inside talking to me, they actually let him go and told me I should contact Airbnb and try to work it out with them. I was just shocked. I felt like the police didn't do their job. After everyone left, I changed the lock code on the door and I contacted Airbnb about what happened. Though I didn't receive payment for the extra day Raymond squatted in my house, they did apparently ban him from ever using the app again. It doesn't really feel like proper justice though, when he was potentially waiting to stab me in my own house, in my own bedroom. This story takes place when I was 9 years old. I'm now almost 25. I was at my great-grandfather's house in Idaho during Christmas break, visiting family and whatnot. This was also the first year my mom's boyfriend came with us because my parents had divorced the summer before. My grandpa used to live in a small Indian reservation town, which has about 1,000 people. My grandpa's house was a small 2-story house that had a lot of field and forest. It was a beautiful house and property, and I miss it dearly. Anyway, about a day after we got there, my aunt, uncle, and cousins who lived in the same town as us came to surprise us by driving 10 hours to visit with us as well, after telling us they weren't going to be able to because of work. It was fun because, at the time, my cousins and I were close. One night, my uncle, my step-aunt, and my cousin who lived just next door to my grandpa came over and visited with everybody. The grown-ups started talking grown-up talk, so me and my cousin Sam, who was 9, Evan, who was 12, and Kennedy, who was 10, decided to go downstairs to the basement and play our monster game. The way this game was played is where Sam and Evan were monsters, and they hid down in the basement with the lights completely off. Then Kennedy and I would have to find them. They would make noises, so we could kind of have easy access to find them, but not fully. Then if we got near them, they would make monster noises and chase Kennedy and I, and we had to go back to the top of the stairs, which was our safe zone. I know it was a kind of stupid game, thinking about it now, but at the time, it was pretty scary but really fun. Anyway, Sam and Evan went downstairs to hide, and they told us to wait 2 minutes before going down to start finding them. Kennedy and I waited upstairs for 2 minutes, and then we went downstairs to find Sam and Evan. Kennedy went down first, and we started looking for them. We just did our normal thing for this game. It was completely pitch black downstairs. The only light down there was the pellet stove, and the moon shining through the window. Although we knew it was just our cousins hiding, it was still pretty scary just because it was pitch black and completely silent. About 5 minutes later, Sam and Evan jumped out and scared us, and then they chased us. We ran back upstairs and decided to play another round. We did our normal thing by waiting for 2 minutes, then heading downstairs. This time I went first. As we went downstairs, we heard Evan or Sam hit the wall, which made me jump. We continued walking down when I noticed a figure standing outside the window. I stopped walking and put my hand out to stop Kennedy. She got a little irritated and said, "Come on, why are you stopping?" I didn't say anything, but I pointed towards the window, showing her the figure. Kennedy noticed the figure, then she whispered, "Sam, Evan, we need you to stop the game. There's someone standing outside." Surprisingly, Sam responded to us. I figured he would have wanted to continue the game and not say anything. He said, "You guys are lying. You're just scared." I was starting to get upset because they wouldn't believe us. "Guys, seriously, look at the window above the TV." Then we saw Sam and Evan emerge from underneath the ping pong table my grandpa had for us, and they looked up. Evan just laughed a little and called us, saying, "It's probably Uncle Stan just outside smoking." I knew it wasn't my Uncle Stan because he always smoked outside on the front porch right by the front door. I then told Evan that. Sam then said, very annoyed, "Then it's probably Grandpa just checking out the house because, you know him, he's always checking to see if the house has any problems. If you guys are worried about it, then go upstairs and check." I then go upstairs to check but pretend that I'm just looking for something. I go into the living room, and everyone I knew there was all in the living room. It wasn't my Uncle Stan, nor my grandpa, or anybody. Everyone was sitting in the living room. My stomach dropped. There was definitely someone out there. I didn't want to tell the adults because I was worried they wouldn't believe me. I go back downstairs as I'm shaking and I tell them, "Guys, everyone's in the living room. No one is missing. There is someone out there." Sam and Evan finally realized this wasn't a joke, and their facial expressions turned into scared expressions. Kennedy began to cry a little. I told her not to make too much noise. We all went to the top of the stairs to figure out what we should do. Of course, Sam and Evan were giving dumb ideas, like shooting the guy or something. We didn't want to tell the adults, so we just stayed at the top for 5 minutes. Then we went back down. When we were back down, the figure was gone. We assumed that the figure just left and went their way. We decided we didn't want to play the game anymore, so we would just play ping pong instead. We turned the light onto the basement, and when they came on, we noticed the window was cracked open. I thought to myself, was the window cracked open this whole time? I looked towards the furniture, and my heart suddenly dropped. There was a man in his mid-40s sitting in one of the sofa chairs, staring at us. We were so scared that we just stood there frozen. The guy began smiling all creepy-like at us. He then began to stand, and then I yelled, "Run!" We ran up the stairs and slammed the door to the basement. Then we ran into the living room, crying to our family that there was a man downstairs. One of my uncles, who's a cop, went and grabbed one of my grandpa's guns and headed downstairs. My uncle came back up after a few minutes and said there was no one down there. So we assumed he climbed back out the window and ran. The adults believed us when we said there was someone down there because outside there were footprints in the snow and they led to my grandpa's driveway. Nothing was stolen downstairs, so that was good. We were all so scared that we just sat with our moms and hugged them. That night, when we went to bed, I was still afraid, so I slept in bed with my mom. My cousins and I haven't played that game since. My grandpa was pretty upset because he thought his windows couldn't be opened from the outside, but he was glad that my cousins and I weren't harmed. My grandfather passed away in October of 2017, and I missed that guy dearly. But ever since that incident, I have always been afraid of going into any basement by myself. Even as I've gotten older, although I haven't been back to my grandpa's in almost a year, I still am scared of that basement or any basement to this day.